What is going on, everybody? Finance Friday live stream. How's everybody doing? In today's video, we actually have somebody else come. It's been a long day. In today's video, we have
at 6 o'clock.
Yeah, our live stream. We're gonna have Nelda Schulte come on. She is out west, and she has a lot of experience with basically writing the handbook for landlords out there. So that'd be great to come on because a lot of the investors who watch this channel, they have challenges with tenants, how to maybe turn over tenants, how you can go about offering N13s and 11s and 12s. What does that look like? So Nelda has a plethora of experience. So we thought we'd have her on today to chat all about what that looks like either in Ontario or out west, all across the country. I think she's coming.
Hello.
Hello. What's going on? Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Anytime. I know we had a really good chat previously before we came on here, so we thought we'd pause it and come on here and do it on our live. But before we get into all the meat and potatoes of it, why don't you kind of introduce yourself to everybody, what you're doing, who you are, and how you kind of got here?
Yeah, be happy to do that. So my business is called neldaschulte.com, and I provide reasonably priced and free resources for landlords who want to do it themselves. And my background is I'm a property investor with properties in Alberta and BC. I've had properties for over 18 years, and I'm a former owner of a property management business that I used to run with my husband in Calgary, Alberta. And I am also a prolific real estate writer. I even worked for the Real Estate Council of Alberta. And I write tons of articles for property investors and landlords on, how to help them once they've got the property, what do they actually do with it? And my main thing is the main difference between having a profitable property and one that's bleeding you money is the tenant. You have to have a quality tenant. And how do you get that quality tenant? So I start out with a very rigorous tenant screening process. You can get a free one on my website, neldaschulte.com. And because you want your real estate investments to be interesting and your tenants to be boring.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Exciting tenants, I would assume, probably are not always the best tenants, depending on what kind of excitement they're causing around the property.
No, I don't like those claw in the stomach telephone calls or people that are taking up 80% of your time, dealing with issues. You're like, oh, no, find a way to get rid of them. Rip the bandage off, get it over with.
Definitely.
We had a discussion about this online before I actually got into the interview about how they deal with it in Ontario and how we deal with it in Alberta. So it's kind of an interesting process.
Yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you deal with it in Alberta, and then we can touch on how it works in Canada.
How horrible it is out here.
Yeah.
Well, in Alberta, it's really a lot easier to get rid of a bad tenant than it is in Ontario. So, for instance, in Alberta, most of us have fixed term leases. So that's a lease that has a definite expiry date. And in Alberta, let's say your tenant is supposed to leave on December the 31st, that's what your lease says, then they have to leave on the 31st at noon. If they don't, you can have them evicted. You can hire an eviction service, or you can go through the Residential Tenancy Dispute Resolution Service, RTDRS. I always have trouble with that acronym, and you can get rid of them. But in Ontario, because there's so many periodic leases and because the RTDRS is not favorable towards landlords, you have a much harder time getting rid of people. You've got to go file all this different paperwork, and you have to wait in the queue for a couple of years. The other thing with Alberta is our RTDRS process is a lot faster than the one in Ontario. So if we do decide to do our evictions on our own, it's a much faster process. It can be a month or 2 months, sometimes shorter than that, depending on what's going on with the system at the time. But it certainly is not 2 years and 3 years, which gives the tenants plenty of time to bankrupt landlords. We don't have that here. So it's more landlord friendly. And we also do not have rent caps in Alberta. There was a bit of a threat of that, and I wrote the Minister of Service Alberta, and he wrote me back, and he assured me that they were not going to put any rent caps on rentals because they tried it in the 80s and it really didn't work. It did the exact opposite of what they wanted it to do. So, those are three major differences, major distinctions between Ontario landlords and Alberta landlords.
A tall glass of wine and a strong worded email goes a long way. Just there's lubricate the gears. But yeah, I mean, like it's always just blowing my mind that it should be simple like that. You have a lease, and if it's for a fixed period and it's set to end at the end, like you leave as a tenant. And obviously, there's some people out there that live on their own rules and different rules of society. But even as from a government standpoint and a systems and processes standpoint, like the fact that there isn't something in place to be able to deal with this, and we allow tenants to be able to sit in there for a year, 2 years, it allows what's now come as like these what is it, like tenants that are now doing this as a job. I forget, my brain's not working.
Professional tenants.
Professional tenants, yeah. And you create a system, and once you have a system, people now know how to navigate the system. And that's the problem, is now you're giving these tenants, these problem tenants, a pathway, and they know how to play the game, and they can time, how long do I need to be in this property before I can leave, have any legal problems, get into another one. And it's blowing up now. We're seeing a lot more people talk about it on the news, which is good, because I think it needs, there needs to be some light shed on it. Obviously, landlords and tenants, it's a touchy subject, across Canada and I guess even in the States, but especially in Ontario, there seems to be a lot of conversation about it. There's a lot of groups that I'm hearing about on Facebook where tenants are able to jump into these groups, and there's like law clerks and stuff that are waiting for them to help. So it's become a whole thing, and not that it isn't already carried away, but it's something that should be dealt with before it's an insolvable problem.
And it's not.
Yeah, I agree. And it's not helping the housing shortage either. So once we start letting more immigrants into Canada, we're going to require even more and more housing. And immigrants help stimulate the economy. They're right now at 0.3% of our economy. So we need more people. We need more people coming in with more skills to increase our population to fuel our economy. But we need to change the laws. I was at the Ontario Landlords Watch conference in Ontario in October, and they were suggesting that they take the non-payment of rent away from Landlords and Tenants Act, and they put it into a criminal justice system, which I think is a much better idea. Because, like, let's say somebody walks into your office and they steal your desk, and somebody steals your car, that's a criminal offense. They can be charged for that. But if some tenant stays in your apartment for 2 years and bankrupts you, somehow that's okay with the Landlords and Tenants Board. Why would that be okay? Why would that not be a criminal offense? They're still stealing money from you.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think, and I'm not playing devil's advocate, but it comes from maybe one extreme side of maybe a slumlord situation, where there probably needs to be the bar set a little bit higher in that regard, in regards to like standardized living, and making sure that the bar for standardized living is set to a point where we don't have to worry about those things, because it is theft. It truly is theft. It's people spend all their hard-earned money, their saved funds, their life savings into these investments, and if people don't pay you to pay for the investment that they've already put in money into, obviously it goes down a path that kind of defers or deters any sort of investment or stimulated investment into a certain area of province. Like, a lot of our major investors are transitioning and moving out of province, or they're moving down to the States because the tenant laws there are different. And we're not saying that these investors are there to take advantage of a system and kick everybody out and do all those things. It's for the protection of the landowner too, or the owner of the actual asset, because if you can't pay the bills, it doesn't foster any sort of stimulation in the economy for introducing more or higher vacancy buildings.
Well, that's when you really start to get into those like slum type landlords as well too. Like, when you create a system that doesn't support a landlord, why does a landlord start to care how he operates and manages and goes about being a landlord? Like, when he feels like they've been left to just kind of fend for themselves, they're gonna fend for themselves, and they're gonna create a bad environment. And like what Josh was saying, as landlords start to move into different areas, either out of province or out of country down in the States, you start taking away jobs from contractors. Like, talking to contractors right now, even just with the slowdown in the market from the interest rates going up, a lot of contractors are kind of feeling that not as much work being done, not a lot of people buying right now, doing the renovations. So it's tough enough as it is right now. You take those jobs away permanently and put them into different provinces or states, different countries. Now you're really taking away income from people's mouths, and it creates a bigger problem than just tenant landlord issues.
Yeah, agreed. And it doesn't have to be that way, not at all. But
what's what's really interesting is like the entire space is actually growing. But we were just at Wealth Hacker, and there are a few for landlord services that are out there now. So there are actual for landlords, you can hire the service that allows your rent to be registered on the credit bureau. So that is kind of a way to be able to either foster people actually paying the rent, so it doesn't reflect the credit bureau, doesn't negatively affect their credit. A few things like that are kind of entering the industry now that I think are going to continue to grow, and as they continue to grow, people are going to start lobbying, and I think that's going to continue to change. The challenge with it really is that the value of the real estate in Ontario is so high that they also don't want it to be a predatory area as well. I think there's a fine line.
Yeah, the entry level is pretty high. I don't know how people afford it. Well, I guess commercial is different than residential, but I'm just going to back up a little bit, because where you said now we're starting to have credit or landlord screening processes such as front lobby, where the tenants' credit for their rental unit is attached to their actual credit report, their credit bureau report, which never happened up until 2 years ago. So that's fantastic. And then you can also list, I'm a member of the landlord front lobby, and you can also list your bad tenants, and you can list why they're bad tenants and how long they've been delinquent in front lobby. So right now there are all these different Facebook groups. There's these private Facebook groups that have lists of bad tenants, which is kind of illegal. You're not supposed to do that. But then again, how are people supposed to notify each other? So what I like about reporting the tenants to the credit bureau is that it gives a central location for landlords to be alerted with bad tenants. Yeah. And it alerts you for good tenants too, because you can help grow. You can help out your really good tenants, and there are a lot of good tenants. I'm not saying they're all bad, because I've had a lot of tenants over the years, and I'd have to say most of them, like 95% of them, are excellent. They want to pay the rent on time. They want to live in a good place. They want to be polite and respectful. They want to be treated well, and they treat your property well. Like I've had very few bad tenants, partly because I have such a rigorous tenant screening process. In fact, people have told me my screening process is harder to get into my properties than it is to get an access card, which I took as a compliment. But you really do have to be thorough, because in Alberta, if you're very thorough with your tenant screening process, you're probably going to be in pretty good shape. In Ontario, you might not be, because it's still not a crystal ball. You can't look into somebody's future and say, are they going to have a drinking problem, a gambling problem? Is their marriage going to break up? Is there going to be a death in the family? They're going to go off the rails and stop paying the rent. Those are things you can't anticipate as a landlord. But if you can report them, then you can warn other people. So that's a big help. And then there are Facebook groups that can help each other out. So but you have to be careful about which ones you go to, because there are a lot of people that offer random advice. For instance, some of the Facebook groups I go on to, people are saying, I'm having a problem with this tenant. And then people just jump in and they say, okay, do this, do that. And the person says, great. And the first question I always ask is, where do you live? Do you live in Canada? Do you live in the United States? What country do you live in? What province do you live in? What state do you live in? Because there are landlord legislation rules for every province, every country, and you need to know what those are so that you can operate within the law. You can't just sort of go like the Wild West and do whatever you want, because there are repercussions for that, and they're very expensive.
Yeah. I think it all comes down to, I think, the baseline of just information, misinformation, not having enough information out there. And if you are a tenant, you're someone that, for the foreseeable future, you're going to be renting, do some of the research, make sure you're informed, but also make sure you're informed on how some of these bad tenants, affect you moving forward, right? Because if you are a good tenant and you're going to be someone that's going to be renting for a while, you want to make sure that you're getting as fair treatment as possible. If there's a bad tenant that's occupying, a unit, and it was a nicely renovated unit, that's one more place that you don't have access to be able to, have a place to live in and call home, right? And to your point, where the amount of bad tenants, may not be as to the level of good tenants, but the problem is that that single bad tenant, the damage that it can cause is astronomical to some of these investors, right? If you got a pretty large mortgage payment, you just can't afford it, and that's what happens to bankrupt you. That one bad tenant, unfortunately, is detrimental, and it has just a huge effect to it. So I think there's there's obviously a lot of, or it seems to be there's some hostile conversation and kind of just feelings towards the landlords, and maybe some landlords back towards the tenants. But I think it could be very easily diffused with just proper knowledge and understanding, and a better system in place. But I don't have the solution to it, unfortunately. So
no, there isn't any one solution. It has to be, well, firstly, landlords have to educate themselves with what the landlord tenant laws are. I mean, that's a must. And a lot of people don't do that. And I was guilty of that too. When I got my first property, I was like, woohoo. I've rented as a tenant before, and I'd also worked part-time as a leasing agent for apartment buildings and for housing complexes, and I thought I was in really good shape. But it's very different when you own the property yourself. And I bought an up down, and I had roommates upstairs. I was house hacking. I had roommates who lived with me that didn't fall under the landlord tenant legislation. And then I rented the downstairs suite, which did fall under the landlord tenant legislation. And I just thought, I do what I would do and it would work for everybody. And I was so wrong. I made so many mistakes, but you learn from them. And hopefully my clients have learned from them as well, from my articles, my courses, and my book.
Yeah. So, I mean, if somebody wanted to know those things, that you have a book, right? So like this book, what is it? Yeah. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the book, the Canadian Landlord Handbook? It looks like one of those books that I got in university that, you go through in your program.
Yes, this tells you everything you need to know about day-to-day operations of running your own business. So everything from placing an ad, what you can write in an ad, because the ads are affected by or influenced by the human rights legislation. So, and I've known of paralegals who were representing landlords who wrote something that was discriminatory in an ad, and they got fined $100,000.
Oh, whoa. $100,000.
So I haven't heard of that happening in Alberta, but in Ontario, where tenants seem to be far more litigious than they are here, I have heard that happening several times. So I talked to a couple paralegals, and they said, you've got to be really careful what you write. And yes, you do. And you also have to be very careful about what you say, what kinds of questions you ask people when you're doing your pre-screening. So you shouldn't, like a lot of landlords, when they first start out, they make the mistake of, making appointments for any and everybody who's interested in their property, which is a huge waste of time. And so you have to ask pre-screening questions. Like if you've got a 1-bedroom condo and, a family of 10 want to rent it, maybe the country they're from is perfectly fine for 10 people to live in a 550 square feet of space. But in Canada, you're violating the housing and building codes, so you can't really do that. So you need to screen those people out so that you're only screening the people in who are qualified to rent your property. So what questions do you ask them? And what questions do you ask them that are legal to ask? So you need to know those things. And then you need to know what questions you can legally ask on the application form. Because it's kind of funny. You can't ask somebody if they have a job, but on the application, you can ask them for proof of their employment.
Or you could hire a property manager and they could do it.
Yes.
One or the other.
Or you can buy my book.
Or you can buy the book. So if you wanted to buy that book, where would you buy it? Buy it on your website. Can you also get it at like Amazon?
Amazon.ca.
Perfect. Right on. That's amazing. I think it was about time somebody put something together that would kind of help people navigate through all that. That's amazing.
Well, and you can get the online version too for $1.49.
There you
so
go.
I mean, landlording just doesn't get any cheaper than that.
For less than a cup of coffee, people, you could not be sued for $99,000.
Yeah, it saves yourself $998.50. So
Yeah.
1,000.
Yeah. So screening is one thing, and then even running a credit check is another thing that you need to know how to do it. And I also have landlording forums on my website, so that if, let's say, you want to run a credit check and you don't know, like most people when they have their first property, they don't know that they can run a credit check. They're not sure where to do it, how to do it. You have to ask permission. It needs to be in writing. So a lot of the property management software like Tenant Cube and Front Lobby have those sorts of things included as well, so that you don't have to. Sorry, my phone went off. I thought I turned the volume off, and I didn't.
There's a perfect opportunity here. You talk to one of your clients about how to navigate picking up a tenant.
Yes.
Help me, Nelda. There's all
I
planned perfectly.
I was talking about something.
It's been a long Friday. I don't know.
Oh yes, credit reports.
Oh yeah. Okay.
You need to get permission to run a credit report, and it needs to be signed and dated, so that
Yes.
you've got proof that yes, indeed, you can go in and run a credit report on that person, and then you've got the proof of it as well. And then you have to destroy it within a certain amount of time. Now, most credit bureaus will only let you see the credit report for a few days, and then poof, it disappears. But if you print it, you have to destroy it, and that's not just throwing it in recycle. You actually have to shred it, because, as we know, I mean, I've had my identity and my credit cards hacked 4 times in the last year.
4 times.
In the last year?
Mhm.
Oh.
Okay, and I don't leave my information lying around, but someone
Reset your identity. Holy.
So is Nelda your original name, or is this now like your 4th character? Or like,
yes, I'm scared to tell you.
I was gonna say, actually, don't answer that question.
I feel like somebody's maybe listening or watching right now.
Yes, I don't even want to answer that question.
No,
It's fine.
Okay, this is just for me being hyper cautious and vigilant, and having a husband who is an IT expert, and I still got hacked 4 times. So obviously, you don't want to keep people's personal information with their first and their last name, their birth date, their information that can be hacked. You can't leave that lying around.
Of course, password ABC123 is also not a great one.
No.
Password, just password.
No, but it is a serious thing. On the mortgage broker side, we see it all the time. In regards to credit, obviously, we have specific checks and balances we need to have for our credit for our clients, but also protecting your personal information. It's super important, like especially in today's day and age. You can't get that stuff back. So whatever, any investor out there, if you guys have any of your files that are on your computer or anything, keep them on some sort of cloud software that isn't hackable or has an extra level of protection. Change your passwords all the time, stuff like that. I'm not an IT guy, but
it's quite crazy too, like how many times I'll see a credit bureau that has some sort of like fraudulent notification on there where it's like, speak to creditor or whatever it is. And you ask the clients and it's like, someone opened up a cell phone. Like it's something small like that, but I mean, it still has, that is the start to a larger issue for someone, right? And hopefully you can catch it after something small like that. But it's way more common. I mean, they tell you how common it is, but I guess you don't really understand until you see it. And with the amount of credit bureaus that we pull, like I'm kind of shocked at how many times it actually comes up and I got to ask a client about it. And and that's just what it is. Hey, someone, something like this happened, and it's a little scary, especially to hear something like for yourself too, like 4 times in a year. Like that's just shocking.
No, I wouldn't email people information. I also do some contract work in writing, and so I've had people say, "Oh, can you send me your?" They send me a form where they want, if they want to pay me, they need my bank account number. Email it to me. I'm like, are you kidding me? I'm not emailing you. Unless we could encrypt it. And they're like, oh, we don't know how to do that. And I'm like, you should never ask for that over email because
we don't do any of that. So we have an online portal. Like the portal's secure. Drop everything in there. Like we try our best to mitigate any sort of professional documentation across email, even though it is secure and safe by Microsoft. I recommend not.
And you know why you do that? Because you are an intelligent person.
We do what we can. Our clients mean a lot.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you're listening, we have everything protected.
We're both intelligent people who have a really nice, secure portal, and that would certainly make me feel very secure. And I would assume that financial institutions would do that, or anyone who deals with finances would do that. But I'm always surprised by how many people who are employers don't. They just say, "Oh, just email it, we'll be fine." I'm like, "Oh no, we're not."
Well, so my older brother works in insurance, and he works on like the Fidelity side, and like some of the stories that he tells me about big banks falling for like basic phishing schemes of like an email that's sent in, hey, quick, like you're supposed to transfer this money, like why didn't you, like this account's supposed to close, and then someone just wires off like $1 million or a few $1 million. It's like, what are you doing? Like you work at like some of the highest levels of financial institutions, and like not CEOs, but like high end VPs and assistant or like presidents and stuff like that are falling for this stuff. And it's like people just don't realize, like you get in that high paced environment, you see something comes in, it's got the important alert on it, you open it up, you click, you deal with it, you send it away, and next thing you know, like a few $1 million gone to fraud. And like it happens so frequently at a high level. Like
you should that's your out loud voice.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yes, it is crazy. And I've gone for a lot of cyber security training, and I actually do cybersecurity training about every couple of weeks. And I think it's a really good idea because you can be scammed so easily because these guys are very, very efficient. and they figure out what people know, and then they're like, oh, now we're going to go in this direction. So yeah, you really have to be careful. And there are scams that I write about fairly frequently that come up at different times of the year that are scams for landlords. Like there was one that we wrote an article about called it was about Anna Grow, because that was theoretically her name. So it's this person who's coming from a foreign country. You know, they're on a barge in the middle of the ocean, so they can't really deal with much communication, but they want to rent your property sight unseen. They want to send you a money order or a check. They want your address. So, I mean, it sounds really good, right? It sounds too good to be true, because it is. And so what the scam was that, and of course we didn't fall for it, but I've known others who have. So they say, oh yeah, I'll go ahead. Here's the application. So the person sends them a money order, sends a landlord a money order that's too much money. So let's say the rent was supposed to be, they say, I'm going to send you a year's rent up front. So let's say the rent's supposed to be $26,000 and they send you $36,000. And then the landlord says, oh, you sent me a money order for $36,000. They say, oh, just send me back the difference. It's not really a money order. It was a fake money order. So now the landlord's out whatever the difference was, $16,000 or $10,000 or whatever.
There you go.
Jeez.
Yeah. But
nothing from people on a barge, and nothing from your uncle that died in Saudi Arabia.
No Nigerian princes.
Nigeria, none of the Nigerian, scams.
It's funny.
Yes.
Right on. Well, it has been an absolute pleasure chatting. If people don't follow you, do you have any social media like accounts, YouTube, Instagram? How would somebody go to follow you if they wanted to?
Yes. Yeah, if you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at Nelda Helps Me. And I have a Facebook group that you can join, that you can be a member of. It's a very supportive group, and it's called Alberta Landlords Watch. So I've got a Facebook group and page. I'm on LinkedIn as well, on Nelda Schulte. And I'm just starting Instagram. So I've been kicking and screaming my way into the 21st century. I'm pretty good with Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn, and Instagram I'm going to learn on Monday.
There you go.
It's definitely a learning curve, but if you hire some people to deal with it, there's a lot of people who probably need your help, especially the fact that you have your book and people want to learn more about it. Buy the book. If you can't buy the book, buy the ebook. It's less than a coffee, guys. It'll tell you everything you need to know about being a landlord in Canada. Really appreciate you coming on, Nelda. If anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to Erin or myself. Always happy to chat.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure.
See ya. Thanks, Nelda.
Thank you.
Bye.